So we've got two experts here joining us now to talk about all of this. Adam Jennings, former Deputy Chief of Staff for former Senator Harry Reid, and author of the book Kill Switch: The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy, and Republican strategist and former Bush White House aide Scott Jennings. Scott and Adam, thanks for being here. Look, this is usually a seriously wonky topic, but it's all the rage in Washington this week. And Scott, I mean, I'd have to ask you, I mean, what is wrong with the idea of returning to an actual talking filibuster? Isn't that a better compromise than getting rid of the filibuster altogether, and something that hypothetically could help a future Republican administration as they're trying to pass legislation through Congress?
Well, I don't know what's wrong with the current rules as they stand. I mean, they have served our country quite well over the last several decades. And as Joe Biden said, they drive moderation and bipartisanship in the legislative process in Washington. I mean, the results of the election are pretty clear. We have pretty relative equilibrium in Washington. The Senate's 50-50. The Congress is almost 50-50. The House, the presidential race was relatively close, although tilted towards Biden. The American people didn't send a message that they wanted one side or the other to have full control. They sent a message that they wanted the sides to work together. The filibuster is the last rule that enforces working together, enforces bipartisanship and policy moderation. So our Republican view is if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and there's no reason to make a change.
Well, I have some questions about whether there has been more bipartisanship and moderation in Congress as a result of the filibuster, but we'll get back to that in a second. Adam, you know, take a look at this list of Democratic priorities for, you know, what they would do if they got rid of the filibuster: passing climate change legislation, immigration reform, et cetera. Will a changing to a talking filibuster, which is something that Joe Biden now says he wants, or he'd be open to, other people like Joe Manchin, Senator Joe Manchin has said he's open to, will it actually help Democrats accomplish any of those priorities?
Well, I think the answer is we don't know, because we've never seen it enacted in this kind of a polarized environment. The talking filibuster used to exist. I think it's what most people think of when they think of the filibuster. They think of Jimmy Stewart and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington on the floor giving a long speech. That's the way it used to work. But it used to be very effective at holding up legislation. The one big catch is that it used to only really be applied to civil rights. And so we've never seen what it looks like when you have to actually sustain a talking filibuster against everything that comes to the floor. I think that can get very exhausting very quickly, and I think it could be effective in breaking some of the gridlock that you see in Washington. At the very least, I think reform is good. It's a good first step. I think if Democrats eventually have to go further, maybe they will. But I certainly would like to see that reform tried.
So, Scott, getting back to this point that you were just raising about whether the Senate is actually working, let's look at this. You may not be able to see this, but our audience can see. It's a chart that shows how often cloture motions have been filed in Congress. Now, for people at home, this is basically how we kind of gauge how often the filibuster is being used. And this chart shows, in the Obama era, a spike of 252 times, but then in the Trump era, 328 times. It seems to suggest that this is happening more and more over time. Doesn't that suggest to you that something isn't functioning in the Senate if this is being used, this tool is being used hundreds of times over the course of a president's presidency?
Well, what that chart suggests to me is that when Donald Trump was the president, Democrats were all too happy to use the filibuster to try to stifle his nominees and stifle his agenda. And now that Joe Biden's the president, they want to do away with it. The blatant hypocrisy on display here is outrageous. We haven't had any filibusters, by the way, since Joe Biden became the president. The last 4 years of filibusters, which are on your chart, are all Democrat-led. And now you have Democrats out today.
But shouldn't that actually encourage Republicans to want to reform this?
No. The Senate rules exist for a reason, and they exist to protect the rights of the minority. And Mitch McConnell made a very, very important statement this week about what would happen if you take away the rights of the minority on the filibuster, because then other rules would be used to grind the Senate to a halt. McConnell's a man of his word. Remember, when Harry Reid weakened the judicial filibuster before, McConnell said on the Senate floor, "You may regret this, and sooner than you think." The same thing would happen if they eliminate the legislative filibuster. Democrats would soon regret it, and it would be bad for the country to eliminate this rule that protects bipartisanship.
And Adam, what's your response to that? If the shoe were on the
Well,
other foot.
Sure. Well, I think Scott's wrong about this rule being invented to encourage bipartisanship. This rule wasn't in the Constitution. It wasn't something the framers envisioned as encouraging bipartisanship. It came about much later to encourage obstruction, and particularly to enforce white supremacy in the antebellum era, and then again in the civil rights era. It was the main tool which Southerners used to uphold Jim Crow. This is a tool that has come about to create gridlock. It is the main reason our government is gridlocked today. I think that Democrats have used it for sure. They certainly used it when I was there. But the fact is, Republicans use it at almost twice the rate of Democrats. It is a tool that encourages gridlock, that allows the Conservative Party to prevent any progressive change from passing, and is something that is, what the framers wanted to do was create a balance between majority rule and minority rights. In recent decades, that balance has been tilted dramatically towards minority rights in a way that creates gridlock. And that is why Washington is gridlocked. What progressives are trying to do is to tilt that balance back towards where you have a functioning government, where things actually pass. You saw that with the American Rescue Plan. This isn't a wild majority rule run amok piece of legislation. This is a piece of legislation that is supported by 75% of the American people, including a majority of Republicans. So I don't think you're going to see, wild mob rule here. You're going to see actually a government functioning and addressing some of the challenges we face.
Adam Jennings, I'm so sorry, Scott, but we're out of time. Scott Jennings, Adam Jennings, we'll do this for another hour next time, I promise. Thanks for being with us. And Republicans.